Thank you for joining the November 1st, 2018 VOLTHA call. We do record these to post them to YouTube. Keep that in mind during presentations and discussions. And with that, we will kick off today's meeting. So today we're following up on some discussion that started on Tuesday's call this week, and that was related to issue number Vol 1303 and discussion on the flow decomposer. There's some related discussion on VOLTHA Discuss as well. And then also discussion on Vol 1093. So let me just check for the folks we've got on the bridge. Is there anyone who had any material they wanted to present as supplemental support for the discussion? If not, we'll just allow folks to kick off the verbal dialogue. Okay, I don't think we have any presentations, so we can go ahead and dive in. If you'd like me to bring up either the thread on VOLTHA Discuss or the two tickets up here, I do have them open on my screen. Just let me know.
Yeah, maybe the thread on VOLTHA Discuss would be good.
Okay, let me pull that up. We may have to scroll through a bit. Okay, so here we'd had some dialogue between Craig and Andy and others, and let's see, I'd had it roughly in here. I'm not sure if we need to scroll further up or if this is a reasonable starting point.
No, yeah, I wasn't sure if this was the same thread I was thinking of.
Oh, am I on the wrong thread?
Well, I mean, it may be that I'm thinking of something different.
Yeah, I think there was two similar, related, but slightly different conversations.
You know,
yeah, I mean, they both involve
the wrong one here.
Flow decomposer, but yeah, really the subject was.
Let me go back.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, really, the subject was with regard to technology profiles, and I can't remember the wording of the actual subject, but it's involving technology profiles and how configuration makes its way into the ONU handler. I know Garish has a check-in that we had a pretty long conversation about, how this default flow information makes its way into the ONU handler, and there's a couple of different options there. I was pretty sure there was a VOLTHA Discuss thread on it as well.
We have done most of the discussion on a Garrett comment review.
Okay.
But
yeah, that may be better, actually.
Okay. Which issue is that? Let me get over
let me find it.
the JIRA.
11578, I think.
Do you know the JIRA ticket for that?
1221. Yeah. Yeah.
578, right?
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. Okay.
So I try to kind of summarize a lot of changes with this regarding technology profile and how to inform the ONU about the much more advanced configuration needed regarding multiple gem ports and one or more unis and the P bits needed and things like that. And a lot of the conversation really came about the somewhat of the reintroduction of the what was it, the inter-adapter messaging, which was removed, but is now being talked about being added back for this. And from my point of view, at least, I put a comment in there, maybe a little further up, to the effect of there's a lot of default knowledge being programmed into the ONU via the download task. It's pretty much loaded up with a lot of assumptions about which gem port to use and whether or not we're only using one uni and a particular management VLAN, and that likely isn't going to serve the needs for everybody. And my comment was really about maybe we don't have that default task do quite so much. Maybe we have that default task really just recognize that there is an ONU and maybe just lock all the unis and then turn over control to, let's say, northbound flow decomposition. You know, whether or not that is something that's derived or directly coming from ONOS, we could discuss, but the idea would be that there would be some sort of default flow push from ONOS that maybe is a more general configuration, but then flow decomposition through the combination of the OLT handler and the ONU handler, you know, derives its default configuration, whether or not you're using a particular set of unis or gem port configuration, things like that. That was at least my my thoughts on it. And I know there's I think Craig and Chip as well had talked about something similar as well.
Yeah, for the most part, I'm kind of in agreement with you up to a certain point. You know, I think what Girish has implemented kind of does achieve what you're talking about as far as getting rid of a lot of the black magic that's in the initial download task and deferring it until you get the flow. You know, to me, I think, you know, that type of information and could be pushed up to the flow decomposer, but I don't necessarily want to see us pushing all the way to ONOS to say, you know, here's an internal flow. Just whatever the first flow that comes in from ONOS that, you know, the complex of the OLT and the ONU need to know that that can be decomposed internally to set up you know, an internal VLAN as necessary. But again,
just to sorry to interrupt there, Craig. It's Sean Masahi. I joined a little late. So there is Vol 1093 that basically describes not using any internal or, you know, magic VLAN numbers or anything like that, but actually just using the subscriber tagging as defined for the service as the data path for the authentication messages. So if you use the subscriber, oh, okay, yeah. So that, I mean, that one basically you just use the defined service path for the subscriber for everything, basically.
The one flaw in that logic is that ePOL itself is technically an untagged frame and doesn't necessarily have to be tagged in any regard. So, you know, but if it does come down with a flow from the controller that has a VLAN on it, you know, the subscriber VLAN, you know, that's okay. But the ePOL flow from the controller should really be just an ether type match flow without a subscriber tag. And I think that could work all the way down to the ONU also. But from the perspective of whether we're going to pass a VLAN 4091, I agree that we shouldn't pass that, you know, internally at all. We should use a subscriber VLAN if necessary. And the second part of the issue is really the inter adapter messaging. And I had some off radar discussions with Girish about his problems. And it's really a synchronization problem between the OLT and the ONU adapter, in that the OLT adapter is allocating gem ports and alloc IDs from the resource manager. And how does it get that information over to the ONU adapter? There's some discussions that the flow decomposer could send the tech profile to both adapters in the decomposition, but it doesn't synchronize, tell the ONU adapter when the gem ports have been allocated.
Yeah, so the original thinking was, so the flow decomposer would pass the, you know, tech profile ID to both ONU and OLT adapter, and the OLT adapter would have to essentially wait until the instance is available in the KV store before it can then go ahead and program the ONU. So we'd have to basically check to either it gets notified of the creation from the KV store, or it periodic checks, or it could, if there could be a synchronization message, like you said, for inter adapter message, I guess. You just have to pick something that is workable, I guess.
Yeah, I agree that the profile ID itself could be passed through in the decomposition, but it's the synchronization. I'm not necessarily in favor of polling, waiting for it to show up.
Yeah.
If there is a mechanism for the KV to notify the ONU that it's been created or updated, that would work. If not, there has to be some sort of synchronization that occurs.
Yeah, I think originally we were thinking that the KV store would be able to notify the ONU adapter that the instance.
The ONU adapter could put a watch on a key in the KV store, and it would get an update when the key changes.
Yeah.
What if the key's already, you could check to see if the key's present, and if it's not, put a watch on it.
Yeah, I believe etcd has essentially a get and watch or something like similar.
Yeah, that would work. That would work perfect.
So is there any additional work we need to do around the EA poll? I mean, do we have to pass that up as untagged, or can we just make it subscriber tagged? Who needs to see that? And that gets passed up to the to ONOS for authentication, I assume.
When we say subscriber tag, do you mean the tag that is actually would be used for the subscriber, or
yes.
Do we need just? Okay. So the only trick with that is we in the kind of existing workflows, we need ePoll to kick off the completion of ePoll kicks off the assignment of the subscriber VLAN. So by default, we just say, take every ePoll that's coming in, and I don't even think it matches on ePoll at this point. I think it just has anything coming in, put it on VLAN 4091, and direct it all to the controller. It just happens that only ePoll is in there.
Yeah, so I guess the change being proposed there is that once the ONU has been authenticated in terms of a serial number or registration ID or however that needs to be done, then the service flow would come down, but the only packets that would be allowed to transfer on that subscriber tag information would be EA poll or PPVOE or whatever the authentication mechanism is.
I see. So the looking up an assignment of the subscriber VLAN would be done by the serial number, registration ID of the ONU, but and
yes.
then once that's done, then ePoll happens, and then that traffic can actually go somewhere meaningful. Okay.
Yeah. So basically,
is it not possible though that a serial number can be assigned and actually have there not be a VLAN value assigned at the time?
Sure, but there's
well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, just because you've got the serial number doesn't necessarily mean you. I mean, if the subscriber service is there in provision, then it would come down. If the subscriber service is not there in provision, then obviously nothing would come down.
Yeah, it needs to wait until the subscriber tagging, etc., is set up for that subscriber service.
I think, Mike, you're saying potentially the serial number can be assigned before the subscriber being provisioned on the northbound, right?
I think it's possible. Yeah. I mean, I don't know that all of the different scenarios that can be covered. I mean, you can place an ONT and you can assign it a serial number, and it has nothing necessarily to do with the subscriber traffic. you can also provision subscriber traffic without having there be a serial number assigned. Those two workflows are not tied together, at least for our use case in AT&T. So you could very well have a case where a customer turns off their service, deprovisions the subscriber information, but the ONT is left there, and the ONT still has a valid serial number, and the network still thinks it's there. And then later, a subscriber, service flow comes in for the next person that lives there, or whatever. So I don't think tying those. I don't think that. All I'm saying is I don't think those two things are directly tied together. Those are actually two separate workflows.
Because sometimes, let's say the apartment complex, right? Potentially the landlord can just say, I have all these units, everybody, ONTs all, registered, and then put down, right? And then only the tenant come in, and then they enable the service. So that's one of the application.
I think all I was saying was that if the subscriber information, the tagging, the bandwidth profile, etc., is not available, then he doesn't get service. He doesn't get to transmit any data.
Right, and all I'm so the point there being is that you could even have a modem hooked up or a RG hooked up, residential gateway hooked up, trying to send EA poll, and if the subscriber service isn't even there, and that the NAS port ID and whatever hasn't even been assigned because we haven't actually put any service on there. That EA poll message might come up, but there's nowhere for it to go, or if it goes upstream, it's not going to get accepted because because the NAS port doesn't belong to anything at the moment.
Or this, AT&T's example is there's no LDAP record. So Craig, you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, in very different types of workflows, we have environments where the actual subscriber information is conveyed through the authentication with VLAN assignments from the Radius server. So in that case, we see that e-polls can flow with no subscriber information provisions, and the actual authentication process itself, at the completion of the authentication, has the VLAN information for the subscriber.
Right. No, I wasn't trying to be prescriptive. I wasn't trying to be prescriptive. I was saying that EA poll would flow, but if there's no in AT&T's case, if there's no NAS ID assigned, it's never going to get accepted. So the EA poll request will never be acknowledged from the upstream. So I wasn't trying to say that's the only way for it to work.
I got you. What I'm trying to say is that I don't want to see us configuring the e-polls VLAN to the subscriber configuration. And I think maybe you're saying
No, I wasn't saying tying them together at all. No, I was saying that, in fact, I was saying that they weren't tied together. I was hoping to make sure that they were independent. Yeah, that subscriber provisioning and serial number assignment. I was just trying to make sure.
So just to summarize, so then I guess there's a requirement that EA poll be able to flow upstream independent of whether a subscriber VLAN tagging flow is established or not, right? There has to be some kind of hidden authentication flow that is established.
Yes, I agree with that. And that's kind of where I came back to the point of, we've actually seen setting up that flow in the ONU that it actually passes e-poll through with no tag on it, arriving at the OLT just as an untagged frame.
Right. But there's all the other stuff for upstream traffic, right? So there needs to be a TCON, there needs to be right. There needs to be bandwidth.
That can come from the tech profile or even a default tech profile.
So we need so we need some kind of default profile for authentication flows to go upstream, I guess.
Yeah. I think that not only untagged but priority tagged messages should be able to go up. I think we have both. I think in AT&T we actually have I think the EA poll comes with a priority tag, but obviously not a VLAN yet. So just to make sure that it's not only untagged that works, but also priority tag that works.
That makes sense.
So we started from, Matt was doing the kickout discussion to now. So do we have a full picture? And I also, I think, can we actually have a flow diagram or state machine, things like that, so we can capture all the cases? Again, I know we also talk about PPPoE. We just have to make sure.
Yes, a sequence diagram would be good. If I had time, I was going to put together one for just the way it works today, just to kind of level set. But yeah, the way we want it to change, I think would be helpful, just to kind of make sure everyone knows where they're at. But specifically with my question, what I'm hoping that my understanding is now the default download task, if you will, that makes a lot of assumptions, that now either completely goes away or becomes a lot smaller, and now ultimately update flow table, the function that gets called today only for subscriber VLANs, now is going to be the one that says any flow that you want to add, be it EAP or not, or VLAN 4091 or not, ultimately all drives in through that entry point, and then from there gets pushed into the ONU, whereas before it was just assumed on startup. Is that?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Yeah. I might volunteer myself to help put that flow chart together, or the sequence diagram together, because it kind of ties into the work that I'm working on for the multiple unis anyway. I kind of got myself blocked a little bit behind the work that Girish is doing and this whole discussion. So, I can take that and circulate with everybody.
That would be great. So when so Sean, hold on to that. So once the sequence diagram comes out and then everybody review it, so when do you think this will come in on the code portion, or when is change going to happen? So that's my question. So Sean, what are you trying to say?
I would say, well, this is Matt. I would say that after the sequence diagram at least is laid out, and the options are whether or not to maybe do ePOL or even not do ePOL, if that's something that's included. Girish's commit is really what started all of this, and I guess if the code that he has could be modified to reflect that would be helpful, or at least to begin to reflect that. And he's not here, so.
I mean, what his commit right now is based on the inner adapter messaging,
yes,
which is very functional, but not where we want. I guess the team, the collective team wants to go, and that's largely due to two problems. One is he's not getting the table, the flow, the tech profile from the flow ID table from the decomposer, and the second one is the synchronization. So it's a little bit different than the discussion on the whether the ePOL is tagged or untagged. I think we can separate those two problems. We can work on getting him to put a watcher on the KV store and solve that problem with the inner adapter messaging.
Right. So do we also want to, based on the ONU detection and its, I guess it's whitelist match, serial number or reg ID or whatever that might be, push down a default authentication flow from ONOS, just so that now it looks like a regular flow that's being established. So basically the flow decomposer gets the table ID and any bandwidth constraints, and then the system allocates a TCON and a gem for authentication flows.
We are getting that ePOL flow from the AAA app from ONOS. Is that a good place for that to happen, or not?
I want to say that might actually already be trickling down most of the way. Shad may know better. I do know that in the ONU handler, there's a section of code that basically says, if we see a flow come in that's not a subscriber VLAN flow right now, ignore it. That could be changed to say now, if I see an ePOL flow come in or I see any other flow come in, actually begin to act on it. But we actually had to put a break in there that said, we can't deal with you doing this right now. We're not ready for it. But it could be actually all the MIB download task stuff could just be moved to be right there as it is, just passed in arguments instead of just hard-coded values.
Right.
Yeah. So we need a table ID and potentially there must be some kind of default bandwidth profile, I guess, right now.
Yeah, right, I think the AAA flow that's coming from ONOS needs to have a tech profile table ID in it, which is not there.
Hello everyone, this is Girish. I'm sorry I joined the call a little late. I somehow missed it. But I will go back to the video recording and I will not take all the actions. But just let me know if there was something important that I missed.
Well, I think I guess the important thing was the basically setting a watch in etcd, get and watch case to notify the ONU adapter that the instance is being created, the tech profile instance with all the TC layer attributes instead of an inter-adapter message.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any other? Go ahead, Sean.
Well, another thought, Sean, is I think there's definitely some code that's been implemented in what's in the current commits, and it's more of a general thought process is, what happens if you get a flow from the controller that doesn't have a table ID in it, and falling back to some default profile ID. Do we assume that every flow that comes from the controller must have a table ID in it, or is it acceptable to have a case where, if there is no table ID, we resort to some default? And if the latter is acceptable, then we could use that approach for the ePOL flow to use a default tech profile if it's not present in the flow itself.
Yeah, I think the idea was kind of discussed at some point, so that's fine by me. We could just have a default, which is maybe a single TCON, single gem.
Basically, like we do today.
Yeah, and it could actually be a tech profile in the KV. We can just identify that table 64 is the default that will be used if there's nothing else provisioned, right, in the flow.
Yeah. Right.
And I think that's what Girish has implemented is he uses table 64 if nothing else is available.
Yeah, how about going with other option of mandating that each of the flows coming from ONOS should have a table ID? Because when a flow is pushed, ONOS knows these flows are for which particular subscriber, right? So it could always send the table ID.
Well, so we that's where we started from, right? But I guess in the case of the authentication flow, there's a requirement that the authentication flow be able to go even though there is no subscriber record in ONOS. Because sometimes, I guess the authentication completion is used to trigger the subscriber provisioning.
So I'm sorry for interrupting, but I think I was having a hard time following the conversation, but now I think I got it as well, and I think Girish is right. ONOS is the source of truth in the system, if I am understanding the philosophy correctly. And so if ONOS expects a user to be authenticated, it needs to install a flow that's appropriate for that to happen. So why would we do anything by default?
It is installing a flow, but the question is whether that flow includes the special table ID that's only known to VOLTHA for the tech profile. So yes, ONOS is installing a flow that says give me ePOL for the authentication, but does that flow include the table ID for the tech profile or not?
Right.
I'm suggesting that it doesn't need to. I think we need to handle the degenerate case where the flows that are coming from the controller don't have a table ID. There may be cases where they might not know it, and this is one case where it might not know the table ID for the subscriber.
Right. In this case, there is no subscriber.
Well, and in this particular case, for the EA poll message, it's not the table ID for the subscriber because it's not about the subscriber information. It's about control messaging. So it's not about the subscriber profile. In fact.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So we started.
Sorry. Go ahead.
We started from the place where we said, okay, the ONU basically is discovered and basically it's compared against the serial number or registration ID or just accepted, right? And then it looks up the subscriber information and uses that subscriber information to establish the subscriber upstream flow that could be used for authentication. But a use case was brought up where the subscriber information may not be known to ONOS until authentication completes. So in that case, we still have to create an upstream flow for the authentication traffic to go upstream to where the server is going to authenticate, and then establish the subscriber information in ONOS.
So I have a question on that again. So if we don't have the subscriber's detail at ONOS, how would the authentication for that happen? Because for the authentication over 802.1x, right, which ultimately would result in radius message being sent out from ONOS, you would need things like the NAS port ID and things like that, which would be there in the subscriber profile. So if you don't have the subscriber, then how would the authentication succeed or fail for that matter?
In the case of radius and requiring a NAS port ID in order to authenticate, you're correct. The authentication will never succeed. We heard another case where they use the EA poll message to go upstream and then push down some subscriber information afterwards. Based on I'm presuming that they're not putting a NAS port ID or they're putting a generic NAS port ID in. But in the case of requiring a NAS port ID for upstream authentication, you're correct. It would never succeed. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it shouldn't. So the point I tried to make earlier, from AT&T's workflow point of view, enabling the ONT by provisioning a serial number and provisioning a subscriber are two completely separate steps. A subscriber obviously will not be able to be authenticated until we provision a subscriber, but the enabling of the ONT by whitelisting or by turning on the serial number and saying we accept that serial number, that ONT can come up and its port can come up and EA poll messages can start coming up. You're correct. They won't ever be accepted upstream in our case, but there was another case that was previously mentioned where they actually should flow up and be able to be acted upon upstream.
Yeah. So could someone describe how that would work? I guess. I mean, is there like a default authentication server that's known somewhere for the EA poll or PPPoE messages?
Yeah, the information, the NAS port ID is derived directly from the port, not from a subscriber, the subscriber information, and forwards it to a default radius server. The actual EAP itself contains the client credentials for identifying with the radius server the actual subscriber information that needs to be delivered to the access device through the radius in the accept messaging.
So
the NAS port ID in that case is really the logical port ID. And it only necessary to get the EAPs that are coming back from the radius server back to the correct supplicant on the 802.1x exchange. It's not for identifying the service, it's just for forwarding the packets to the correct endpoint.
And in that case, we just need to make sure that the EA poll or whatever the protocol happens to be gets sent upstream, but we'd have to use some default path, right? Some default service. Right.
The current AAA app and ONOS wouldn't support that, but we could make a change to support that use case if necessary.
So would this be like a default tech profile that says, in maybe certain cases, we don't know who you are yet from a subscriber point of view, but we at least need to push a flow down so we can figure it out?
Well, so in that case, I mean, it seems like this might be a future requirement. Can we assume that the subscriber record is going to be there until we need to meet this new requirement and add another story to support that later on? Or is there a need right now to support that?
From my point of view, and maybe I'm being redundant here, I don't think you can assume the subscriber profile is there whenever the ONT serial number is learned and the ONT ranges and comes up. I don't think you can assume the subscriber profile is there. If you want to say in AT&T's case or in AT&T's workflow case that, you know, the create subscriber, which pushes down the NAS port ID, triggers a flow that will allow EA poll to happen because a create subscriber message came down with enough information to provide that detail, then that works for AT&T. I don't know that works for other cases, but you know, that works for AT&T. But because, you know, we know that without an NAS port ID, you're not, and that's coming down from the top, you're not going to get, you're never going to get authenticated. So, but I just, all I want to say from AT&T's point of view, I'm just trying to say that we don't want to tie to say that whenever the serial number has arrived, there has to be a subscriber there. Maybe not. And whenever the subscriber arrives, that should trigger something to continue further in the process whenever a subscriber is provisioned.
Yeah, I mean, there's no requirement that subscriber record be there when the ONU is discovered, but once the two are there, then you get the flow, the upstream flow.
That works for AT&T's use case. I don't know that works for others, but that works for AT&T.
And one thing is, either within the CBA or VOLTHA, we need to discuss the PPPO use case. So I think I still think maybe with a sequence diagram Craig is going to put together, and that will help the discussion. And then I have to admit, you know, I don't understand the PPPOE, what is required in order for the initial work. So that requires separate discussion session. I think Julie probably going to work on that to schedule it. So I would say, you know, yeah, Craig, if you can put that sequence diagram together based on today's comments, I think that will be great.
Yes, I can do that. I'll take Mike and Steve's suggestions and Amit's about having you know, not necessarily the presence of the subscriber information. It doesn't have to be known at the time of discovery, but I can use the discussion points here that when they're both present, I will propagate a flow. And then I'll also try to include a representation of my use case that I presented of you know, some defaults authentication flow, you know, for when there's no subscriber information. I'll try to capture both of the use cases in the diagrams for our discussion's sake. And maybe, you know, to Steve's point, you know, one of them may be a future story to be developed.
Okay. So Kevin, is your question being addressed?
I think so.
Okay, that's great. One thing, Matt, if you're still on, you know, when I heard about flow decomposition, I thought about the temporary, you know, the decomposition flow mechanism, you know, adapter introduced by Matt and you and Nick, right? So I'm wondering whether this has anything to do with that.
It may. So a lot of the consternation about flow decomposition in the past has been around a lot of these flows that aren't flows that, or configuration that happens that kind of is very loosely derived from other things that aren't very clear. Some of that's been cleared up. There's a change that Chip made recently that cleared up some of that. So there may be a point where like OpenOLT now doesn't kind of take a shortcut around a lot of flow decomposition that it has today. Mostly because if a lot of these newer features end up in flow decomposition we need, then we'll have to go back. But the other part too is when we move to the new core, all the flow decomposer is getting rewritten anyway. So, you know, one way or another, we'll go back.
Right. Because I remember the temporary implementation will be expire when the 2.0 comes in. So.
But I mean, it was things like VLAN 4091 and the kind of using, you know, port numbers as VLANs for making certain things happen behind the scenes. It, you know, caused a lot of confusion. But it's been getting better, and we've kind of started backing off on, you know, some of the mystery of that. So it might, this probably would help that some more.
I think also, you know, to me, you know, the flow decomposition is still kind of confusing. but I think for the, you know, a lot of people just new to the VOLTHA project, also that can be, you know, take some time to understand.
Well, you know, for better or worse, having, you know, that be the path configuration makes its way into the ONU, you know, consistent would be good. It would be some way we all understand this is how things get in here, this is how configuration gets in. And we kind of start backing off on, you know, these built-in defaults that magically bring uniports up with a particular gem port and things like that.
Yep. Okay, great.
And just to be mindful that we don't want a lot of ALEC IDs be sitting around that aren't really being used. So if we're going to be using the authentication path, then is that going to be overridden or deleted when we establish the real data paths? Because otherwise, you know, the DPA algorithm is going to be polling all these on, you know, these ALEC IDs it knows about that aren't sending anything that, you know, so it's going to be wasteful of bandwidth, especially at the 10 gig rate.
No,
I just,
we either need to reuse them or get rid of them when the real flow comes down.
I know in today's configuration they are reused. It's, you know, basically what's already there is there. We just, you know, add the additional subscriber information and, oh, by the way, keep collecting EAP. Because that was a scenario we went into where if you'd already had your successful subscriber VLANs pushed and however long goes by, days or weeks or hours, there would be a refresh of EAP that we still need to be able to collect.
right, and if that goes over the, you know, the new real subscriber data path, that doesn't really matter, right?
Yeah, and that's what it does today. It works out just the same way. So it's almost like the default you get is really just enough to say get forward EAP, you know, at all. Just have some way of pushing something down to say at least forward it. And then when the real one comes along, keep forwarding it, but also now we have subscriber VLANs as well.
Okay.
Great.
Cool. I guess we're done.
Okay. Any last comments or additional questions? Okay, next on the agenda, and I didn't know if we'd have time, we'll do a little bit of some discussion about Sprint 10 planning, because we know we have some items that are going to carry over from Sprint 9 into Sprint 10. Sean, you'd also sent a link in chat. Did you want me to open that up?
No, I just want to remind people about that.
Okay.
So Julie, I have to step out, leave early today. I have another call coming up. I just want to, on the chat, that is the VOLTHA ONF Connect. So I would like to have the community to take a look over the schedule. The Sienna is going to present the VOLTHA 2.0 new core. Sergio is on that agenda, and then I think Sean is planning to do some the technology profile introduction to the community also. Sean.
Yeah, I sent a request to Bill, but I haven't heard anything back.
Right. And then I'm actually just send Chip an email regarding to maybe OMCI talk. Potentially the time slot schedule has been pretty full at this point. But I would like to have the community take a look at the schedule and then encourage you to attend the ONF Connect meeting. I think the SIBA and the VOLTHA is going to have a lot of the activity going on there. Okay, have a good rest of the call. Julie, I have to drop.
Okay, thanks, Sean. And I just brought up from our release planning slides, Sean had mentioned future discussion on PPPoE support. So in VOLTHA 2.0, we had that on the list as sort of exploratory work. If people had anything they wanted to bring forward, then we could consider it at that point. But it's not in scope at this moment. So that would be something to consider for future release. And so we'll target a time for some discussion there, as Sean mentioned. And with that, then let's go over to our sprint schedule. So we're wrapping up Sprint 9 at the end of this week, which is tomorrow. Just a reminder to folks also to keep JIRA updated as you're completing work, closing things out. Please keep the status updated tomorrow if possible. And then after we close out the sprint, we'll carry over unfinished items to Sprint 10. So our main focus on Sprint 10 was going to be integration in the Kubernetes cluster environment. We did have a discussion a few weeks ago, and our plan for the containerization of the adapters is during the first portion of Sprint 10. We're expecting the OpenOLT adapter and the Broadcom OpenOMCI ONU adapter containerization work to go on at that time. And I know there's already active discussion going on the containerization for at least the OpenOLT adapter. So thanks everyone for that work that's in progress at this point. So we have that. I think also, let me go over to JIRA. We have one item that we had to find a new owner for, and we did that just, I think it may have been on Tuesday. That's 10/22. This is for the reporting the ONU registration ID from VOLTHA. And so Jason agreed to pick up that work, but since it kind of transitioned over to him towards the end of this sprint, we're expecting this may need to be done in Sprint 10 instead. So I just wanted to check if there were any concerns from the group if we move that item to Sprint 10. So I'll leave it in Sprint 9 through tomorrow, but I expect it will need to be in Sprint 10.
Yes, I agree. I'm Jason. I agree. Move Sprint 10.
Yes. Thanks, Jason. Any concerns from the group? So I know we're trying to keep most of the development in Sprint 9, but I think it's good for us to get this in. It was one of our high priority items. So Jason, thank you for agreeing to that work. I did not hear any objections from the group to include that. So I think we are okay there, Jason, with that plan. Okay. And let me go back over to our schedule. So right now we do still have the 3 weeks as the plan for Sprint 10 for that the HA cluster testing and the containerization work. So We do have the placeholder for Sprint 10 open at this point. You can map items over as appropriate, and we may need to have some new items created as well. So feel free to do that as needed for the containerization of the adapters if we don't have stories ready, and then those can be pulled into Sprint 10. Are there any other items that the group is aware of that need to be tackled at the same time in Sprint 10? Anything that needs some continued development work other than the ones we've just discussed?
Multiple unis.
Ah, yes, that's right. Thank you, Craig. And I think we moved that over. Let me see if it's moved over yet. We talked about that on, we go to the backlog, on the other call. And that's the item we got agreement on a previous call to do that in Sprint 10 as well. I don't know if I pulled that over yet. Let me just get to our placeholder. No. So Craig, I can pull that one over into Sprint 10 for planning now. Thank you for that reminder.
And how about 1020 as well? I thought someone taken up 1020.
We don't have anyone who has picked that up yet. So that one is still unassigned. And Craig, I think this one is yours right here. I'll go ahead and pull that in. So do we have anyone who will have cycles to work on 1020 or in that beginning of Sprint 10? Okay, so I know Sean had to leave, but I can talk with him, see if we can look around again for some resources and see if we find anyone who can pull this in. I'm not hearing any volunteers at the moment, so we'll do a little work offline. But at this point, I don't know of any resources available to work on it. Are there any objections from the group to pulling that one in as well? I think that's one that's been on the high priority list for a while as well. Okay, so we'll tackle those, and then our Sprint 11 is again what is planned for the hardening sprint, and we do have those 3 weeks allocated for that as well. We've had a lot of discussion about documentation on recent calls as well. The intent is in conjunction with the hardening sprint to also complete and update as much of the documentation as possible. So we may need to have some new stories created or tasks to track specific items. So we're trying to cover that in advance of the completion of the sprint for as much as possible this time. So we'll see how that goes with time management during that final sprint. And then that will take us through the middle of December, which is our target for the release. So that'd be just prior to the end of the year. So that's our path forward for the next few weeks. Do we have any other items that are of a concern for the group at this point that we need to discuss with the larger group today? Okay, so when we get to Sprint 11, I'd like to do the planning for that. We can start pulling in the high priority defects and work on burning down some of the bugs that are opened against this and see how far we get with that. So that will take place in a few weeks. And I think we may be able to give you some time back today. So let me go quickly back to our active sprint. So again, just a reminder to everyone, the sprint is closing tomorrow. And so just try to keep JIRA updated as possible. I know we're still having some issues with getting some of the merges done. Last I checked yesterday, we still had some issues for the item that GAMS was working on and the related merge in ONO. So I'll follow up on that this morning and see where we are. I think that may be it for today. And again, for the folks who are, I know also for, is Sergio on? Let me see. I don't see Sergio on today. So we know some of the affinity router work will be in Sprint 10 as well. And so I'll be looking for Sergio to allocate those stories between Sprint 9, which is wrapping up. I know he has a lot of work in flight, and then Sprint 10 as well for the remainder. Okay, questions?
Julie, I have a concern about the tech profile story that Girish is working on. Is that slated for Sprint 9 or Sprint 10? There's a lot of, a lot of our discussion this morning has been around some of the work that went into it, and I know there's a lot of rework that you may have to do. If that's planned to be done by tomorrow, I'd be surprised.
Yeah, that's true too.
Craig, I think it will carry, at least for the initial part of, carry over to the initial part of Sprint 10. I don't think I can address and rework all of the things by tomorrow.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
So
and that was and part of my concern there was not just that work, but the work that I've committed to for Sprint 10 is kind of dependent on that completing. So
right,
it's a little bit at risk.
That's true. Okay. Craig, thanks for pointing that out. So yes, so I think this one was targeted for Sprint 9, but based on the discussion day, we'll be completing that work in Sprint 10. And Craig, you have a dependency on that. So I'll go ahead and leave this in Sprint 9 until it closes out, and then we'll go ahead and move it over to Sprint 10 at that time. Other questions or concerns from the group? Yes?
No, I just said thanks.
All right, and thank you for your feedback. And let me go back to our agenda. Okay, so for next week, we do have a couple items slated for next Thursday's call. We've got the PONSIM v2 demo related to the containerization of that, and then the integration of that with the core, and then Craig's proposed design for the work on VOL 1023 as well. And then future items, we'll get those scheduled in as appropriate. And I think that's it for today then. Last call for questions from the group before we adjourn. All right, we'll give you a little bit of time back today. Thanks everyone, and thank you for the discussion. And Craig, when you have that sequence diagram, if you could put that on VOLTA Discuss so people could start the dialogue, that would be great.
Will do, thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone, bye-bye.
Thanks.